Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our cybersecurity surgery. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you're all well. So we are the cybersecurity partners, and we're based in Leeds. We're a cybersecurity consultancy. And today we have for our speakers, Robert, Chris, Tony, Kevin, and Ramiz. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Robert Briggs, who will be our first presenter.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. I'm going to give a very quick overview on risk management, why we do it, how to do it, etc. So a quick whistle-stop tour of the processes, etc. So next slide, please. So why do you do security risk management? So risk is part of everyday life. There's never a zero risk. The important thing that we do on a daily basis is identify the risks and then manage them. So, for example, every day when you go and cross a road, you obviously manage the risks of being hit by a car. But then, even without any cars on the road, you could sprain your ankle stepping off onto the pavement. On a business level, there's also, many companies had risks about power failure, so they have backup generators in place. However, given the current situations where we're all working from home, I doubt very many people have got backup generators at home, which could impact their day-to-day work. Apart from that, security risk management is also needed or generally needed for compliance. If you comply with international security standards, ISO 27000, you need a security risk management process in place. But I mean, look, taking a step back, it's actually also good for business. You can use security risk management for investment cost decisions, identifying productivity gains, and doing an analysis of where you could, for example, improve your current processes, etc. Next slide, please. So methods and calculations, there are lots of different ways to do this, generally categorized up into two, the quantitative and qualitative approaches. So quantitative means that you apply lots of financial information to all of your assets and other aspects of your organization. It's very detailed, very complex, but it does provide tangible financial impacts. And the qualitative approach is a bit more subjective. It's a lot easier to do, and it allows you to express the risks in a high-level summary level. I think at this point it's important to note that it is not just technical security risks that you need to look for. And I think from an approach perspective, an organisation should look at how they integrate security risks into the wider enterprise risk frameworks, should an organisation have them. But ultimately, everything comes down to the calculation that you need to do, which is identify risk. You've got to look at the impact of something happening to you and your organization and the likelihood of that happening. This cartoon on the side shows obviously the different high impact, high probabilities, etc., and the different scenarios. And from that, you can quite easily perceive which of the risks you would take and which you wouldn't. And that is what the calculation of the risk is always about, identifying them. Next slide, please. So who to involve when doing a security risk assessment. So different roles have got a different view on what the impact would be or what the likelihood is. So directors, for example, will be focusing very much on the financial, whereas senior management teams will be looking at the reputation of the organisation, and the people who operate the either IT systems or the processes on a daily basis will be looking at the operational risks. As an example of that, if you were an organisation looking to transition your IT services to the cloud, the directors generally, broad sweeping statement, will be looking at how much money they can save and what the impact to them is. Whereas the senior management will want to ensure that the reputation of the organisation is not impacted with any transition, any change. And the team members, they're more interested in how the day-to-day operations are going to run and what the impact would be there. So again, just to reiterate, it's not just the IT side of things, it is covering all of these aspects. covering all of these views. Next slide, please. So what do we do with the risk identification? So once a risk is identified, we should document and acknowledge that security risks, because for any decisions, business decisions to be made, the risk needs to be written in non-technical language. What is the impact to the business? And then the nominated business owner and technical owner of those risks can then or will have sight of them and know what to do. And then once all risks have been captured, identified, they need to be ranked. So whether that is on a 5x5 matrix or whether it's on a sliding scale, as per the two diagrams on there, it's at that point allows you to identify which risks are more important to you and how they should apply. So, for example, the reuse of passwords on an ongoing basis. If they are ranked, the directors may be less concerned about them, the team managers will be, but where does that sit for you across the organisation? And it's making that decision so that you have made an informed decision rather than just trying to guess as to what you should do or what that impact to you will be. So next slide, please. So what happens once you've identified all of those risks? This is, I think, the more important part regarding the risk mitigation. Once you have identified the risks, we need to identify what needs to happen to mitigate or put controls in place so that risk doesn't materialize. And at this point, I think it's important to point out that the risk or the controls that are put in place do not need to be expensive. You'll get a lot of people who will try to sell very expensive products that will fix or sort of mitigate controls. So, for example, the physical access controls, you may even look at iris scanning tools. Now, they're very expensive, and there's also an impact on the personal data that you're collecting, etc., that will be put in place. But actually, do you need that level of control? There are other alternatives. So you may implement or choose to implement access card controls and tie that in with a policy that says you should not share access controls, and then back that up again with the random audits to make sure they're not being done. So that is significantly cheaper than a very expensive high-tech control. And once you've identified what controls are available to mitigate those risks, they need to be prioritised. So there will be a couple of options that immediately jump to your mind regarding, let's try and fix all the easy ones first, or let's try and fix the high risk first, that we're a bit more comfortable. The important thing here is to look at a balanced approach and making sure that you're getting the risk down to a level that you're acceptable with in a reasonable time frame. So using that example above, the policy, the policy controls, not the share access controls, and the random audit, they don't cost anything, and they're also very quick to implement. That's something that can be done very quickly, easily done to help manage that risk. But then also remember, you're never going to remove all risks. We said that at the beginning, there's no way to reduce it. So it's just got to be reduced to an acceptable level. So using encryption, for example, encryption of data, that encrypting all personal data does mean that you meet Information Commissioner data protection guidelines. However, it must be noted that any external attacker who really wants to get that access can use infinite amount of technical resources and time to try and break that encryption. So what we've done by encrypting data is bring the risk down to an acceptable level, and also we're able to then control who can access that data from either sort of bypasser attacks or sort of random attacks. Obviously, encryption all depends on protecting the encryption keys. So in summary, on the next slide, security risks exist. They always will do. We're never going to get rid of them all. The important thing is do not ignore them. Identify and manage them on an ongoing basis. And then the best way to do that is to prioritize the risks, the order that you're going to mitigate them, and put a balanced approach to managing them. So that was my very quick overview. We've got a lot to go through. I'm now going to pass you on to my colleague, Tony, who'll go through cloud security. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Tony Payne. I am a Director at Cybersecurity Partners, and I will just take you through a high-level view of cloud security. Next slide, please. So what is the cloud? So traditionally, in the past, and still in some use case today, a lot of server infrastructure has been hosted in what has been an on-premise data center, either owned by a large organization or part of rented space. What organizations are now moving to is what is determined as cloud infrastructure, which is server infrastructure and applications that are hosted via supplier, which is generally accessed over the internet or via a provisioned network connection. The three main service provisions by suppliers are infrastructure as a service, which gives you just a base infrastructure. Essentially, what we define in technical terms as a piece of tin. So what would be a server, for example. The platform as a service, which is that piece of tin, plus an operating system, be it Windows or Red Hat, which you can build your applications or services on. And software as a service, which encompasses the previous two offerings, and also gives you the application on top. So think of areas such as Qlik for financial accounting or Sage Accountancy are a couple of examples of what would be software as a service. The main providers currently in the cloud space are AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, Azure, provided by Microsoft, and GCP, which is Google provided service. Next slide, please. So when it comes to utilizing cloud services, what every provider will give you is the shared responsibility model. So in the shared responsibility model, the responsibility for security is shared between the supplier and the customer. So the supplier in general terms will be responsible for the infrastructure that encompasses the data center that they provide you a service with. So the hardware, the software that runs that data center, the internal networking, the data center facilities, and areas such as patch management and configuration management of the underlying architecture. As well as that underlying architecture, services that they provide to you to help you with your service provision, such as key management, certificate management, login and auditing functionality, will also be provided to you and managed by the supplier. Next slide, please. When it comes to shared responsibility, it is always down to the customer to secure their data. So if you provision an infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service or software as a service, you also need to be aware that whatever data you put on that platform, you need to secure it appropriately. As Robert previously mentioned, the ICO stipulate many controls to ensure personal data. One of those is encryption. So when you provision a cloud service, one of the areas that you need to look at when doing that is around encryption of data and access to that data. So if you have a software as a service provisioned, an application that's provided over the internet via a cloud supplier, how users access that application and how customers access that application is down to you. The supplier might give you the tools to do it, but how you secure it is down to you. So you may use Active Directory on an Azure platform. You may use two-factor authentication as provided by the supplier. These are the kind of areas that you need to look at when you're provisioning a cloud service. So for infrastructure as a service, customers are generally responsible for everything above the infrastructure layer. So if you provision an instance, which is essentially a server in a cloud environment, everything that you put on that instance or that piece of infrastructure is your responsibility to configure and control. For platform as a service, it's generally everything above the operating system layer. So the cloud supplier will provide you with an instance or a server, and then a Red Hat or Windows operating system, for example. Whatever you add to that, you will need to configure and securely implement. For software as a service, as a supplier will generally provide you with the infrastructure, the operating system and the application. It's generally how you access that application and how you secure the data is your responsibility. These things need to be taken into careful consideration when you are purchasing or leveraging any cloud service. This is a generalized view, but in theory, this is the basic level of awareness you need to have when procuring a cloud service. Next slide, please. So some key areas to look for. So accessing a cloud environment, TLS 1.2, which is transport layer security, which underpins web services that public and businesses use today. TLS 1.2 is used for web browser security. So we use that as the baseline when it comes to connectivity between the public and the businesses to cloud platforms. There's also VPNs, so virtual private network. Now this can be configured using a cloud service, or it can be a bespoke deployment from business to business. This again will secure your information over the internet, and it's key that these two areas are identified when you want to use a cloud service to make sure any data you communicate across the internet is secure. So encryption, so all of the cloud suppliers now give you the ability to encrypt your data. Generally, it's an inbuilt service. So for AWS, they've got a key management service. For Azure, they've got Key Vault. Both of these solutions you can use to encrypt your data at rest. You can encrypt data at rest, and you can encrypt your volume at rest as well. Encrypting the volume is basically encrypting the disk. So if you've got a laptop, for example, generally, if you've been provisioned one from a business, that will have an encrypted volume hard drive, and the principle is still the same. We would always suggest when provisioning cloud services that you encrypt the volume and you encrypt the data as well. Access control is equally important, so you need to control who accesses your data, be it internally by your members of staff or public by the internet, your customers. You need to embed access control provision and start that early on in your project process when you want to embed security into your services. And always utilize controls that are provided by the service providers. It's their infrastructure, their service. 99 times out of 100, what they provide you from an access control perspective is going to be better than you can provide bespoke wise. Always follow the guidance by the supplier. The supplier, like I said previously, it's their infrastructure, their service, they know it better than you will. Always follow their guidance when looking to secure the services. Limit access to your services from the internet. Only allow access to individuals and users who you want access. Don't open it all to the internet. That could cause you security problems going forward. Where you can, use open source tooling for security testing, or you can use an independent testing company to secure your deployment and secure your services to ensure that your service is secure to be used. And always, where you can, engage those organizations or people with skills and knowledge in deploying cloud services where you can. If you're unsure of anything, it's best to go to the people who've done this numerous times to utilize their skills and knowledge. Next slide, please. So one of the key things with cloud services is looking at certifications. So some of the key ones to look at: ISO 27001, which underpins a lot of security, which gives you information security management systems. ISO 27018, which is around protecting personal cloud, so personal data on the cloud. And CSA Star and PCI DSS, which when you look on supplier information, they will give you what certifications they have. Next slide, please. So in summary, look for certifications. Most, if not all, cloud services have got them certifications that I've mentioned previously. Apply appropriate controls for access control and encryption of data and secure communication of data into your cloud environment, and always ask for help if required. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I will pass on to my next colleague.
Unmute, please, Chris.
I'll say that again then, because I was on mute there. I've just been told. Hi, I'm Chris Bell. I'm one of the security architects here at CSP, and I'm going to give you a very quick overview of encryption and how it's used on the internet. Next slide, please. So what is encryption? There are a few definitions around, and for this particular slide, I've just picked on 3. The first 2 from Osaka and NIST are quite technical in how they talk about plain text, ciphertext and algorithms. The third one is one I think is much more business friendly, when it's saying it's a translation of information into a form that no one else can see unless we want them to, and we give them the deciphering mechanism in order to allow them to access that information. Next slide, please. So why use encryption? Well, the obvious one that people always talk about is confidentiality. So this is where we prevent unauthorized access to the information. However, encryption has got quite a few techniques, and they can also deal with other business issues. So when we're talking about integrity of information, where we want to make sure that the receiver of the information receives the stuff that we sent them, the authentication, so when we're having a dialogue with an organization or with an individual or with a website, we want to make sure that the person we're chatting with and sending information to, or the entity we're sending information or sharing information with, is who we think they are. And non-repudiation, certainly when it comes to things like financial transactions, etc., we really want to ensure that people can't say we didn't transfer that $10,000 to that account by mistake. So integrity, authentication, non-repudiation, as well as confidentiality, can all be delivered using encryption mechanisms. Next slide, please. Right. When we talk about encryption, there are 2, pardon the phrase, key elements to it. There is the actual actions we take on that plain text or clear information in order to make it undecipherable, and that set of actions in computer terms, we use an algorithm, a set of manipulations to that data to transform it to look like something else. We also have to make use of a key. The key is that bit that's known only to the people that need to access that information. So in general, obviously, when you're talking to all the various websites, all the various products, the mechanism to encrypt that data is quite well known. So we know about libraries from OpenSSH, OpenSSL, etc. The open bit is something that's key. Everybody understands these libraries. So the methods are well known by everybody that implements an encryption regime. What is not well known by these people is the keys that are used as part of that encryption mechanism to encrypt or decrypt the data. So in essence, the algorithm and the code and the software, you don't really need to protect that much because everybody should know about it, but please protect the keys because it's the keys that are important. Next slide, please. There are 2 basic methods of encryption. We talk about symmetric and asymmetric or public key encryption. Symmetric is one that people can understand quite easily. This is where you share the same key that you are encrypting with the people that you want to decrypt the data. So this is basically, with this, the key that is used to encrypt the data is exactly the same key as is used to decrypt it. Advantages of symmetric encryption are it's fast, it can deal with large volumes of data, it is fairly low overhead on the systems that process it, and you'll also hear it said it's divided into different, they've got block and stream ciphers. So stream ciphers are used for things like mobile telephony, etc. Block ciphers tend to be used for things like disk encryption, etc. Asymmetric or public key encryption is seldom used to encrypt large amounts of data. It is very inefficient. It's high resource, However, what it is good for is looking after those other bits we talked about, the identification, the authentication, the non-repudiation. So generally, confidentiality bit would be driven within the process by the symmetric key, whereas the other elements of it would come from using a PKI or asymmetric type encryption. Asymmetric encryption uses two keys. It uses a public key and a private key. The private key, says it on the tin, that is the key that no one else knows. It is yours, it's your private key. Associated with the private key is the public key. The public key is the one that you give to people or people receive in order to decrypt things that are encrypted with your private key. So the public key is a share. You share the public key, but please only share it with people that really need to know it. I know it says public, but you don't really want to share it to everybody if you can avoid it. Private keys are never shared at all. When we talk about what Tony mentioned earlier about using cloud services and TLS 1.2, the TLS 1.2 standard, the thing that gives you that S on your HTTP, secure sockets layer, uses both symmetric and asymmetric keys as part of the mechanism to identify the endpoint you're connecting to and to secure your data in transit to the endpoint. Next slide, please. Tony also mentioned certificates. Certificates are associated with the PKI or the asymmetric encryption model. The internet cannot really work unless there's some level of trust enabled on it. Trust in this context comes from the use of trusted third parties known as certificate authorities. When you generate a public and private key pair, a certificate authority will digitally sign your public key to say basically it is coming from you. So that when people are given your public key, they have an independent confirmation that that public key belongs to the thing they're connecting to. For instance, the CSP website, we have a public key as part of our TLS handshake, and that is signed by an external CA, so you know that it is CSP and not someone pretending to be CSP. This thing is done through the use of something called a digital certificate. The certificate is just a bunch of data. It holds things like the website name, it holds information about what encryption algorithms are supported, it holds quite a robust bit of information. But the important thing about it, it is digitally signed by a trusted third party. So signing, what do we mean by signing? Going back to the previous rules, if you notice them on the slide, in a public-private key encryption, things that are encrypted with the public key can only be decrypted by the private key, and things that are encrypted by the private key can only be decrypted by the public key. So when a certificate authority signs a certificate, in effect, it's encrypting part of the certificate with its private key. Therefore, when that certificate goes into your browser and your browser decrypts it with the public key, it knows that the CA is there, it's a trusted CA, and that the trusted CA is vouching for you. So it vouches for your identity using asymmetric encryption. How does the browser know that the public key is a trusted one? That is because the public keys of CAs are shipped with the browsers during manufacture. So people like VeriSign, some other trusted ones, they're all built into the browsers when you get them from Microsoft or Google, etc. Next slide, please. So it's just to build on that a little bit and to try and put a picture around it. We're talking here about a TLS session setup. This is the thing we're talking about when you connect to a website or your clients connect to your website and they have their little s, the HTTPS. This is a bit of a slimmed down version of what's actually taking place, but we'll go through it fairly quickly. These sessions are always initiated from the client. You want to go and connect to a website that's secure. So when you do this, your device will send out something called the client hello. This basically wakes up the web server at the other end and says, we want to start talking securely, please. When the web server gets this client hello message and wakes up, it is very polite, so it responds with a server hello. As part of that server hello exchange, it will present its certificate, this thing that is signed by somebody else that guarantees that that secure web server is CSP's web server, and that gets presented back to the client. The client looks at that and says, oh, we're good to go now. I've connected to csp.partners and I've got csp.partners talking to me, so I know I'm speaking to the right place. At that point, we start to negotiate the symmetric keys. Remember the symmetric keys? These are ones that are shared and both ends need to know what they are. There are mechanisms on the internet that we won't go in for this, but there are mechanisms to make sure that key can be shared without ever hitting the wire. Each end can be forced to calculate a shared key, and that shared key is never seen, never transmitted. It's just that they magically come to the same answer for the key. And that's what we're talking about there when master key and ephemeral keys are agreed. This is agreeing the keys that we're going to be using for that symmetric encryption. Once you've agreed that, the client and the server start saying, we're happy now to go ahead. So the first thing they do is the client says, okay, then I've agreed the keys. I'm going to switch now to symmetric encryption. Server will respond and say, yeah, okay, I've agreed my key as well. We know what we're doing now, so we'll both switch to symmetric. At that point, the PKI bit, the asymmetric bit is complete. And now we are transmitting the data. And when we're transmitting the data, to keep that confidentiality up, we use symmetric encryption for all the bulk data methods that we're doing. Next slide, please. In summary, encryption and this trust model enforced by encryption is a foundation of internet security. If you're using an internet service, always look for the padlock when connecting and using the website. And if you're developing your own websites for public exposure, please always develop them securely and always get a certificate signed by a trusted authority. With that, that's the very whistle-stop tour of encryption on the internet, and I'm going to hand over to Ramiz for the next section.
Hello everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Ramiz and I'm a consultant at Cybersecurity Partners. My topic today for the surgery is on password reuse. Next slide please. So what is password reuse? Password reuse is where users are using the same password for all online accounts which they create and that require a password. Using the same passwords will leave your online accounts vulnerable. The more a password is used, the more opportunities there are for that password to be compromised. If an attacker gets hold of that one password and you're using it for all of your accounts, and they've got a password for all of your online accounts. I understand the temptation behind people reusing the same passwords, as we've all got a lot of accounts that we've got to remember their details for. I've got some online accounts that don't hold any personal or sensitive information. I only use them just to look at reviews for a product or a service, but I'm required to make an account with their username and a password. Those sort of accounts, you could get away with using the same passwords for those accounts because there's no details for anybody to get hold of. And just an important thing to remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fault of a user for that password to get compromised. It could be a data leak for whichever site you've signed up to that could leak your password, and if you are reusing passwords, it's what it's done is it's leaked your password for every online account you've got. And next slide please. So it's important to stay safe online. use strong, unique passwords for every account, which include a mix of words, numbers and symbols, something similar to what you'd see in the password policy. If you are using strong, unique passwords for each account, then that means if one account's compromised, the rest of your accounts are safe because they've got different passwords to the one that's been compromised. To manage different passwords, you can use password managers, which do this for you. So the only password you've got to remember is the one for the password manager, and that the password manager will store all of your passwords for you. There's free password managers available, which include desktop-based, cloud-based and browser-based solutions. Examples of password managers include KeePass, LastPass and OneID. Please note we don't recommend a particular one. If you just have a think about the number of online accounts you've got, and if you're reusing passwords, it's a lot of accounts. So you've got your social media accounts, you've got your work-related accounts, email accounts, and your online shopping accounts for any entertainment sites you've signed up to. The National Cybersecurity Centre, who are a government agency that provide guidance and support to both the public and private sector on how to stay protected from security related issues. They've got some guidance on their website, and what they say you should do is use a sequence of 3 random words that you're going to remember, but make them as long as you can and include uppercase numbers and characters in them passwords. Next slide, please. So here's a few stats. So a Google survey found that at least 65% of people reuse passwords across multiple, if not all, sites. Another survey found that 91% of respondents claimed to understand the risks of reusing passwords, and out of them, 59% admitted to still carry on reusing passwords. An average person reuses each password as many as 14 times, and compromised passwords are responsible for 81% of hacking-related breaches. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, there's solutions to the problem of reusing the same passwords. So as I mentioned earlier, password managers store these passwords for you. So have a look online and you use these password managers. You can use two-factor authentication and biometrics, which obviously will depend on the device you're using and if the option's there. So this can be done by using authenticating apps, receiving SMS codes and push-based authentication. Using password managers will give users an opportunity to not worry about as much as they normally would when they're creating passwords, because when you're using password managers, then users don't have to remember them passwords. They're going to be stored in a password manager. Next slide, please. And here's a summary of what I've just gone over. So password reuse is a huge risk. People are reusing passwords because it's easy. It's easier for a cyber criminal to get access to all of a user's accounts because it just takes that one password to get compromised or leaked, and they've got hold of all your accounts. And you're using them for all of your accounts, it's difficult for users to recover stolen accounts. The email accounts that they'll have the same password, but then if it's out there, that account's been compromised, the one that you used to recover any stolen, any compromised accounts. It could have a financial impact on people. So you've got online accounts for shopping, entertainment, which have your credit card details linked on there, your bank details. So it could have a financial impact on users. But people are aware of the risks, but they're still doing it anyway. The solutions available, use them. It's got your password managers, two-factor authentication. I think if people thought about the consequences the risks could have, rather than just the risks, then I think the passwords. Thank you for joining us. I'll now pass you over to my colleague Kevin.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name's Kevin Else. I'm the consultancy director at CSP. I'm going to do a very whistle-stop tour through compliance. So basically, building on what we've already mentioned today, if you put that all together, how do you demonstrate that to a customer, a supplier, any organization, how good your security is? Next slide, please. So there are standards and there are best practices about. The difference being is that standards are obviously something you can get compliant with or fully certified against, and you have a badge that you can demonstrate to your clients and suppliers, etc. What sort of security levels that you have. There's just a few examples on screen there, but then there's also the best practices. So, for example, something like National Cyber Security Centre's top 10 guidelines effectively addresses probably about 80% of the type of threats that you get out there. What tends to be the case is that these guidelines are very much a set of rules and a set of things that you can implement, whereas the standards tend to be a set of standards, for want of a better word, a set of controls that you need to comply, but they don't technically tell you how to implement those controls. Next slide, please. So what are you looking to achieve in getting compliance or showing some level of compliance? Very often it's just down to a business advantage, to have a badge that is better for your customers, or it may be a contractual obligation. We're seeing quite a lot of work these days, or tenders that are coming out that insist on one or other level of certification. Any government work at the moment, you normally would expect a minimum of Cyber Essentials. Is it for your own assurance reasons? Has there been something like your business insurance has insisted that you have some sort of levels of controls? Otherwise, they're going to charge you a lot more. If you're looking to expand the business, maybe it's investor pressure that they want to be sure, or there may just be a legal requirement depending on the type of data that you're dealing with, particularly if you're dealing with medical data, as a lot of environments are in this current situation. There are very specific legal requirements as to why and what sort of controls that you should have in place. Next slide, please. There's a lot of untruths, shall we say, and mysteries about compliance and how you implement these standards within an organization. The regular one is it's just a technology thing, it's an IT thing, just let IT sort it out. Or when, as Tony was talking about with cloud services, the assumption is that the supplier does it all, so I don't have to worry about all of it. But as Tony's explained, you get that shared responsibility model. Or it'll never work because we've got users that will never understand these sort of controls, and we don't want to put those sort of limitations on people. Users can actually be your greatest asset. They're the ones that know what happens day to day. They're the ones that understand when something is different, when something is changed. So they're probably your first line as far as identifying a potential security risk. Yes, everybody knows about the stories about phishing campaigns, etc., and things like that. But most people, if you give them, with a bit of education and a bit of backup and support, can quite easily identify phishing emails. So it's not a case of it's just a technology thing. We'll just buy a piece of kit which is going to sort security out. That does not work. Next slide, please. So what are the sort of things you can do? As I say, taking on board everything that we've already said, what are the things that you can do quickly? So check what your suppliers are doing, check what your competition is doing. If all your competition's got Cyber Essentials, then go for Cyber Essentials Plus, or go for the ISO 27 standard. A lot of these standards, people are quite fearful of the standards because all they see is a huge number of controls. But the core of any compliance is you documenting what you're going to do and then having the evidence to prove that you're doing it. If you document that we only change passwords every 60 days, okay, it may not be best practice, but it will be, and you have evidence that that happens, then you've met the criteria. You have a control in place, it's documented, and you have evidence that it's actually been implemented. Look at the NCSC's top 10, as I said before, will address about 80% of the common threats that are out there. And they're not expensive, they're not major transformations. Yes, there may be changes in your culture and the way you approach your information and your business, but they're not massive pieces of kit or hundreds of auditors coming in to check everything out all the day. Talk to the people of how they access it, understand how the information flows through your organization. By doing that, you're able then to see where those risk elements may be. They can help you in understanding where the potential weaknesses is. The age-old thing that, whatever control you put in, users are going to find a way around it because the control will interfere with their jobs. So they don't like changing the passwords every 20 days, 30 days or whatever. So they do the classic thing of just adding a 1 to the end of it, or adding a number and incrementing it through the cycle of the 12 passwords that you have within their history. It's common practice. That's what everybody, lots of people do. But build on that culture for them to understand why it's important that the passwords are strong, and get their support in with it. Make it so that it's not your security is not a blocker, but it helps people feel assured about what they're doing. Think about the risks. Robert said before about analysing the risks and defining what are the high risks, which are the ones that you can address first and easier, hopefully, and understand the value of the information. That will help you calculate those risks easier. And document what you're doing, and very often you're already doing it. Lots of organizations we're finding, when they're looking at standards and compliance, of already doing very good practice and already making sure passwords aren't recycled, making sure information is destroyed when it's not needed, etc., and things like that. The thing about getting certification is documenting that you're doing that and providing the evidence that you're doing it. You may have been doing the best thing ever for the last 10 years, but if you haven't got the evidence that you've been doing it, how is an auditor and an accreditor meant to be able to tick the box and say, yes, okay, well, they can demonstrate they've done that? So document what you're doing and collate the evidence. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, I'll repeat it again. You're already probably doing a lot of what's required by these security controls and standards. Document it. Make sure you collect the evidence. Make sure that you can able to prove that you close down accounts that haven't been used after so many days. Remove accounts that haven't been used after they've been closed down after another period or whatever. That you have the logs to be able to look at to investigate when there's been a breach or when there's been a problem, and involve the users. They can be your greatest asset. Understand how they're using systems. People don't tend to use systems in exactly the same way that designers of systems intended them to be used. And we all go, oh no, yeah, system won't let me do this, that, and the other. Why on earth won't it let me do? So listen to them. It'll make their information flow better and therefore their security better. Okay, so that just about wraps up a very brief guideline, my guidelines on compliance. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the other presentations as well. I'm now going to transfer back to Natalie, who will take us through the question and answer session.
Are you on mute, Natalie?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself then. My mouse wasn't working. So thank you, Kevin, for that, passing me over. Like Kevin said, we're now going to go into the Q&A. So please type in some questions in our Q&A box if you have them throughout our topics. So I'm going to start off with Tina, who's asked a question. Any information for new starters in the cybersecurity field on what certificates are best to gain to get started in the industry? So someone answer that one for me, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. Tina, yes, there are quite a few qualifications out there for people who wish to join. I'm not sure if you have seen it on the Leeds Digital event, but we're also running an event on the 1st of October relating to starting in the cybersecurity area and setting out careers. And we've got guest speakers from the Chartered Institute of Information Security as well. So there is a lot more detailed advice that we are going to give in that one regarding the skills that are being looked for, and also career pathways and apprenticeships. So I think don't get concerned, or don't be too concerned about all of the very detailed technical courses that are on offer, and there's lots of them, and there are certainly batches, but I would recommend joining that meeting on the 1st of October, where we will provide a bit more information on some of the courses that are around, including free cybersecurity awareness training sessions and how to get into the area. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for that. Hopefully that answers your question, Tina. So we've got another one here from Philip. So NCSC don't advocate forcing password changes. Comments?
I'll take that one. So the NCSC, they put guidance out there for you to follow. I mean, generally everything they put there, it's good. It's good to follow it and put it into place either at home or in an organisation. But if they don't mention anything, it doesn't necessarily mean someone can't do anything. You can't do anything additional. It's basically down to the risk level of the organisation. It's guidance, but you need a secure configured password in reality. So it's down to the individual or the organisation to see if there's anything additional they can do. If NCSC don't mention anything, you can still have a think. Is there anything else we can do? Is what they've mentioned, is it enough, or can we do anything extra? Don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that, but that's my view on that.
Yeah, if I just add to that as well, NCSC are trying to encourage people to think about more complicated passwords. So part of their guidance is that they are looking for people to use 3 words which are in some way associated with something but not other people will know. So increasing the length of the password and therefore the complexity of it, rather than falling into the trap of what I was saying before about every month it forces you to change, so you change the number at the end of it. The classic thing of until everybody enforced it, we never used capitals, so we all ended up putting a capital in, but guess what, we all put it at the beginning. Then when it insisted on a number, so we added a number at the end, and then we just increment it. And then special characters, well, okay, so we'll just bung something on the end, but that's obviously a restricted character set as well. So what they're trying to encourage is you to think a lot more about the quality of the password that you're creating, rather than forcing you to change it. They've actually also changed their guidance as far as they always used to say never write passwords down. They now actually tell you to write them down, but obviously in a secure place, and you keep that physically secure in some way, shape or form. I don't think that's the right approach, but they're looking at it more of a improving the quality of passwords. Okay.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions that we have. If anybody's got another question, quickly pop it in there whilst I just go over this last slide. So thank you all to our speakers and their presentations. Got some really interesting topics there, and I hope everyone enjoyed it and took something away from it. But if you do have any questions or want to get in touch, we have our email address there on the slide, so please save that into your address book and contact our speakers on LinkedIn if you want to connect with them. and also our LinkedIn business page. So that is Cybersecurity Partners, and our Twitter is CyberSec Partners. So so you can keep up to date with all our announcements, future events, top tips, free advice, and our news within the cybersecurity world. So I'm just going to check the questions one more time. And I think that's all we've got for today. So yeah, thank you once again for all your questions, and thank you to our speakers, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.